Ask yourselves, what does that word really mean? We all know it means throwing a ball around with your friends, or horsing around, or just generally having fun. But raise your hand if you think it might mean something more than that. We certainly do. We think of play as a moment of pure possibility, a moment in which life's barriers fall down around you, a moment in which, even if it's just for 1 second, you believe that you can be anything or anyone you want to be. And that's something that every kid deserves, whether you live in LA, San Diego, Lebanon, Jordan, or the West Bank. So I come from the world of sport. And while I could tell you the story about this guy, and I could talk about the Olympic Games, I would rather tell you the story about that guy. Because as you can see, there is nothing inherently Olympic about this guy, except for these Speedos, which we all know are amazing. Because I feel like there's this misconception, and that is the Olympics and Olympians are this unattainable, unimaginable thing. But where does an Olympian start? She starts in a backyard pool. She starts on a playground. Or in my case, in the back of a bakery at a fencing club in Los Angeles. So when I was 10 years old, I was playing lots of sports. I played basketball, I played baseball, I played soccer, but ironically, I was the kid that was running the opposite direction from the ball. So I didn't have athlete written all over me from the beginning. But I had this friend who was fencing, and he said, Jason, I think you should come along and try fencing with me. And I said, oh, okay, whatever, you know, I got nothing to lose, sure. And so I show up at the club, and I take a lesson with this coach, and he says, okay, Jason, I want you to stand like this, and I want you to move forward like this, and move back like this, and move your arm like this, and lunge like this. And I'm like bored to tears already. It's completely mechanical. It's like everything I've ever done, ever in any other sport in my life. And so I stuck it out somehow for 2 months. I don't know how. I think my mom probably threatened to take away my video games if I didn't stick it out. Sorry, Mom. And I was going to quit. And the club manager said, Jason, I think you might have some talent. I really want you to try one more thing. I want to introduce you to this other coach. I think you're going to get along really well. So I grumble and I groan and I say, okay, fine. So I commit to come back the next Saturday. And I walk in and I meet this guy. And he's this big, burly man. He has this very exquisite beard. And he comes up and he says in this very thick accent, hello, I'm Daniel Costin. I'm from Romania. And I'm 10 years old. I have no idea where Romania is. So I'm staring at him blankly, and he goes, I'm from Transylvania. And I'm like, yeah, Dracula. Everybody knows Dracula. And I'm immediately comfortable with him. So we start the lesson, and he goes, what do you want to work on? And I go, I don't know. I know like 3 moves at this point, so I'm like, okay, let's do a lunge. And so he says, okay, show me what you got. So I get down in my fencing position, and I concentrate really hard because I want to get it right, of course. And I'm like, okay, 1, 2, 3, go! And I lunge. And he stares at me. And he goes, all right, my man. Smooth like cream cheese on a bagel. And I look at him, and he looks at me. I think he's a little bit crazy, but the good kind of crazy. And we burst into laughter. And that was the beginning of our coach-student relationship. From that point on, everything was a game. Everything was fun. And when I was learning, which invariably I was every single day, I didn't realize that I was learning. Because what he had, I now realize in retrospect, is this profound ability to put me in my most natural state, the state in which kids learn best, which is at play.
So Jason's story of becoming an Olympian is incredibly inspiring, and I think it really details the power that sport and play can have in our lives and our futures. For me, I realized the power of sport and play when I started working in an organization called Right to Play, which is a global humanitarian group that trains teachers and coaches in over 20 countries how to use play as a teaching tool for things like conflict resolution, disease prevention, sanitation, and more. And before I started at Right to Play, the things that came to mind for me when I thought about sport and play were competing on my swim team growing up, my college rowing days, playing in a sandbox, exploring mountains and valleys. Those are my feet in Colorado. And for all of you, maybe sport and play means horseback riding competitions, trying out for varsity soccer, playing the piano. Lo and behold, taking on the right to play journey, I was going to soon learn the power of sport and play meant a lot more than all of those things. So soon after I started Right to Play, last fall I took a trip to the Middle East with a handful of colleagues and supporters, and we saw our programs in action in Jordan, Lebanon, and the West Bank. And we visited dozens of coaches and teachers who were using our programs in their classrooms and community centers every day. We also visited and played with the children in those programs. And some of them were 3 years old, and some of them were 11 years old, and some were Muslim, some were Christian, some were handicapped, boys, girls. But all of them were children who had a right to play. And I can remember one school in particular. It was based within the city limits of Beirut in Lebanon. It was in a refugee camp. And this part of the city was originally constructed to be temporary. And so everything about it felt temporary. You know, there were telephone wires everywhere. You could see cement and cinder blocks. You could see cutouts in walls that had been intended for windows that never received any glass. There was trash here and there. And this one school, it was 4 floors high, and it was nestled within this very poor part of town. And there were clothing lines on the outside of it, graffiti, and so on. And one of the first things that really struck me about this school is when we entered, it was incredibly quiet, like it was a Saturday. And my colleagues led our travel group into this tiny little classroom on the first floor, and inside this tiny little classroom were these tiny little kids. And they were lining the walls. They couldn't have been more than 3 or 4 years old. And they were just so quiet. They were seated, still, and silent, and their eyes were just bulging out of their heads. They were totally bewildered by this group of adults that had just splashed onto their day out of nowhere. And soon thereafter, the teacher of that classroom started facilitating one of our signature games, which situates kids in a circle and has them following a leader in whatever actions he or she is conducting, whether that's squeezing the hand of a neighbor or tapping one's head, but the kind of activity that we think of as an icebreaker, just to get people mobilized and focused on a task. And besides how quiet that room was when we first walked in, the other thing that really struck me was that once this play got underway, the volume of the room started to rise. There was this swelling of movement and laughter and chatter and just plain fun. And thereafter, other teachers and other classrooms on other floors started facilitating our programs as well. I can remember a very narrow stairwell that connected the floors. And because it was a school that had very few private spaces or closed doors, the sound really carried. And so on one level, you could see 4-year-olds playing follow the leader and learning the value of taking turns. On another level, you could see 6-year-olds passing along sandbags, working in relay teams, and learning the lesson of teamwork to achieve a goal. And my colleagues and I, we would sort of jump into a game here and there on various levels and just start playing along. And about an hour into the visit, we all reconvened at the rooftop of this school. And this was our vision. And what occurred to me fairly quickly was that despite this very raw, unfinished, edgy landscape that we were looking at, it was play that was providing this sparkling, robust soundtrack in the floors below. There's a thought leader in the field of sport for development and peace by the name of Dr. Stuart Brown. And his book, which is titled Play, details how essential play is to a child's mastery of social skills, ability to problem solve, ability to communicate and work with others, ability to be creative. The United Nations Office on Sport for Development is governed based on, quote unquote, the unique nature that sport has to mobilize, attract, and inspire. The UN literally has an office focused on the power of play. Olympic and professional athletes like Jason are raising their voices, using their social media platforms to promote the importance of play-based learning and after-school activities. This movement This sport for development and peace movement is catching on globally because it really works. Play really matters. And now, over a year later, the memories of that school in Beirut, of those kids, of that soundtrack, have become the bedrock for why it is that I do what I do and why I'm here today.
So now raise your hand if you think play might be something more than just kicking a soccer ball around.
There we go. Both Jason and I understand that as an Olympian and a champion of play-based learning, play is just so incredibly essential to cultivating the architects of the future. And that's you guys. So keep playing.
Thank you.